Okay, I think I'm recording. Cool.
Oh, do you have the audio though?
I hope so.
Sometimes
Before
really.
it was doing like the bar thing.
Oh, it was doing the bar thing? Okay. That's all you
I'm
got.
an audio minor. It was doing the bar thing. Okay. I don't want to have like a thing. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about. Or is this you? Yeah. What's audio, Dante?
Oh, that was my part?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I guess, yeah. Bullshit.
Are we recording?
Yes.
Yes. Audio, I guess, like, what is audio? The basic definition, I guess, is just sound produced by something. And in our field, that typically is accompanied by an image or a video, as we call it in the industry. Yeah, sound design basically is the umbrella term for anything that goes into the soundtrack, which is not just the album that comes out to promote the movie. It's every bit of audio that goes underneath the video to support it and add character and nuance to the whatever production. That's like a pretty broad general definition of what audio is. Do you want me to go over this, like what parts of audio is next, or?
Yeah, you could do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the basic skeleton of the sound design, which is a very broad term and is just kind of thrown around, I feel like, it comes down to at least 4, sometimes 5 or 6 basic parts. You have dialogue, you have effects, you have backgrounds, and you have music. Dialogue can be broken up into one of 2 categories, which can, depending on what you're doing, can be broken down further. But the 2 large sections of what dialogue can be broken down into is on-set dialogue, which is what you would, the group on the track list will be labeled dialogue, obviously. But then you also have dialogue that was recorded not on set and in post, which is ADR, and that gets its own section because the audio that you record there is typically not, even though you typically do try to use the same mics that were used on set, it is not the same acoustic environment, and so the mixer or ADR editor will have to treat that as a separate and specific instance and help make it sound like on-set audio. Yes.
What does ADR stand for?
Automatic dialogue replacement. Thank you for asking. Yeah, it's basically whenever you have an actor that flubbed a line or didn't, or they want to change the line in post, you just have them come into the studio, re-record it, and then you throw it in and do some audio editing to make it sound like it was recorded on set, and hopefully you never know that it was an ADR line. What else is there? Then there's effects, which are you can include Foley in effect. Do you guys know what Foley is? Does anyone not know what Foley is? Okay. So effects are basically anything that is not Foley. That's how I define it. And Foley, to better understand what effects are, for me, it helps to understand what Foley is. And what Foley is anything a character on screen, any sound that they produce that is not their voice. So if they're like moving and you hear like the rustle of their clothes, you hear like footsteps. Footsteps are under the category of Foley, but typically are also under their own section. This is where, it kind of like branches out like a Hydra type thing. It's like you start off with 4 categories, but each one of them, depending on the scale of the production, can be broken down into more specific things depending on how big the production is. So Foley is footsteps, clothing rustle, like touching anything, like button pushing, I don't know, like just a bunch of different things. Anything that the actor's body physically touches and produces a sound, that's what Foley is to me. And effects are basically everything that the character is not touching. So like an explosion off screen, a door shutting, a car driving by, pretty much anything else that they don't touch. Then you have what are the name. The name is different between different editors, but for this next section, which is backgrounds or ambiences, which is what you think it would be. It's like the ambience. Like if we were out in a street, if we were the scene was in like a busy New York City street, the ambiences and the backgrounds would obviously be like the cars, the city, the sound of everything that is not people. or not the like characters that are speaking. Also, a thing that I should go back to ADR again, is, do you guys know what group looping is, or walla? Do you know what that means? So, for anyone who doesn't know, those are two names for types of like ADR that isn't intelligible. So, for instance, group looping and walla, I've heard, are basically the same thing. There's slight differences, but I'm not really sure what they are. I've always used them interchangeably. But so if you're, if you're watching like How I Met Your Mother, it's like you have the 4 or 5 characters talking at the bar, but in the background you hear like people talking, but you can't really pick out what they're saying. That's not part of the background. You think that might be, but because they're people, they're a part of the section ADR. But it's not really ADR because you're not really trying to understand. It's not intelligible. So what it is walla, or group looping, which is where you have like a cast of people, like just random actors that come into the studio and they just like they like improv, and you record that, and you just like layer it a bunch of times, and so you put it in the background of your mix where you can't understand what they're saying, but it just adds presence, and like it's more authentic to have real people instead of just using the same ones. Beyond backgrounds and ambiances, there are music. Obviously, it's pretty strict. So that's like the skeletal structure of how you organize an audio session for a soundtrack.
Yeah. So now just like get into basic like sound concepts. One of the biggest things that I think is like important to know for doing any sound design or like any post thing is thinking about diegetic versus non-diegetic. And basically what diegetic means is that it is like happening in the world of the image, I guess. So like if a door slams on screen, that's diegetic. But if there's like a song playing over like a montage that like isn't in the real world, then that's non-diegetic. So yeah, so that's so that's important to consider when you're like messing with sound in post, because if you have an effect and you want to make it sound like it's happening in the room or in the image, then you have to that's the thing you have to consider when you like do when you like do effects and do like EQ or reverb, which we'll get to in a second.
For an example, if you have like if you have some Radiohead song as a montage sequence to cut. Just an example.
Nick walks out.
I've got the 90s on the brain right now. If you're using that as a transition between different scenes, it's not diegetic. It's not in the world, so you wouldn't mix it as if it's coming within the room or whatever space that the music is playing over. You would just have the song played, and so and especially if you get into more like experimental territory as far as narrative goes, the line between diegetic and non-diegetic can be blurry, depending on like the where this who's the film is following, like what perspective. Sometimes a character is hearing sounds that like another character is not supposed to hear. Is that diegetic, non-diegetic? It is, but with qualifiers. So it's good to keep that in mind, because you can use it to create a more artistic and believable world.
Yeah. So so diegetic versus non-diegetic, that's like a really big thing, and we're gonna come back to that a lot through the course of all this. But another thing to consider is localization, which I just think is important. So who knows what the difference between mono and stereo is? Anyone?
Does anyone want to?
Someone that's not an admin, raise their hand.
Also, we would like to hear the definition.
What?
I will because
Okay.
it's difficult to consider.
Anyone?
Anyone just like who knows it and just wants to wing it, or
Someone
you don't know it,
guess.
just guess.
Oh my god.
Nobody?
Owen, what do you think it is?
I mean, difference in how many channels of audio?
Yeah. So mono is basically that in left and right, the same thing is happening. There's no like It's just one straight channel, basically. In stereo, it's two distinct, like, different things happening on the left and right. And then you can get into, like, surround sound, and it's crazy, but we're not doing that. So basically what localization means is just, like, matching the sound to the picture in a sense of, like, let's say a door slams over there. You don't want the sound to come out on this speaker because that wouldn't make any sense. You want it to come out over there.
It's diegetic.
Yeah. Wow, we're coming back to diegetic already. Wow. Yeah, so that's another thing to consider when doing sound design. So now to move into this whole project that I got lined up here with all these colorful clips. So I don't remember if Jack went over this in his editing demo or not, but J and L cuts, did you go?
I didn't get to that.
Cool.
You mentioned
So yeah, so who knows what a J cut or an L cut is?
Nick, what is it?
Yeah, what's-
Oh,
or
sorry,
Jackie.
I didn't see her. I didn't see
Why
her.
is it always
Just use it.
Cause you got
Yeah.
ambition.
I don't want to say it because if you say it wrong, Shane's going to give me a dirty look.
She's looking away.
If she gives you a dirty look, I'll give her a dirty look.
Take
So it's
notes.
fine.
Okay, well, if I'm correct, a J cut is when like I can't like give like a formal definition. All I can explain is like when the video and the audio are linked like first together, and then it's like a different video, but it's the same audio from like, the first video is a J cut. Like.
Well, in a J cut, what comes? So a cut is obviously separates two different pieces of film.
Yes.
In a J cut, does the audio precede the following video, or does the video precede the following audio? Like
The
following.
audio precedes the video.
In a J cut?
That would be enough.
The audio proceed. Yeah, no, cause
No.
yeah,
No.
Wait, what?
J.
J cut, cause it looks like
J
like
is-
here. Let's look over here. For example, spoilers. This is a J cut. It looks like a J.
It's such a stupid definition because it
Yeah.
looks like an L.
And it looks like an L
Yeah.
to me.
That's what you said. Yeah, people were saying she was wrong.
That's enough.
Yeah, I know.
I'm so confused now. Am I wrong?
No, you're right.
You were right. The audio in a
Yes.
J cut, the audio comes before the video that it's attached to.
Yes.
And an L cut, what's the difference?
The
It's
opposite.
reversed.
The opposite. The video comes first.
Woo!
Very good.
So- Yeah. So, what's the purpose of using J and L cuts? To make your things just look more seamless and just like have a have a better flow. So here's a scene from a field production project that I did last year, and I have two different versions: one that uses J cuts and one that does not. So, okay, wait, where's the volume on this?
It's the two bottom buttons. On the Crestron,
Oh,
yeah, those two buttons.
No, that's different.
wait, oh no, the two bottom? No.
no, it
Make sure the Premiere project.
Yeah, Premiere.
What?
Okay, Premiere Pro CC, go to Preferences.
Okay. Wait.
Just
Audio hardware.
Oh God.
Default output.
output.
And Adobe really likes to mess up here.
Right. Okay.
Yep, you got it.
Alright, so I do that way.
Yeah, it's working. Oh, it's also badly recorded, so it's only coming out of one channel. So don't do that.
I know how to fix that.
Yeah, we can get to that in a bit on how to fix this. Yeah. So here's without a J cut.
Man, I don't know what she sees in him.
Yeah, man, totally.
I'm just tired of people coming in here and thinking they can steal my girl.
So yeah, it wasn't a very good project.
Do you have the whole thing? Can we watch it?
I do.
Oh, it's-
That could be at the end. It's really bad. And then this is a version where I use J cuts.
Man, I don't know what she sees in him.
Yeah, man, totally.
I'm just tired of people coming in here and thinking they can steal my girl.
Wow.
I
So
did a very similar introduction project in that same exact spot.
wow. I don't.
It's like
I'm
you
just
go to
gonna
the same
say-
college.
Just a hunch. I don't think we did anywhere near a similar project. I'll show you the project after. It is probably not what you did. It's bad. What? it's very relatable. Yeah, so that's J and L cuts. I didn't use any L cuts because
Who needs them?
yeah, who needs L cuts?
They can also be used very effectively for. In here, this was J and L cuts used in a scene, but you can also use them very effectively as transitions to convey the passage of time. So if you have a scene and you bring in music underneath it and it plays, and then like fade the image away, it produces the effect of time passing more so than if you just cut. But it depends on how you're editing. But so yeah, you can use them in the scene or as a transition between scenes.
So now I want to call up a special guest, Nick, to demonstrate the pen tool.
Come on.
Alright.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, bet you weren't expecting that one.
No, I wasn't actually.
Yeah, you can
When'd you get in? Arm time?
do it on the bad speakers one, just because.
On this one?
Yeah, because it's longer.
Oh.
Oh,
yeah.
That's so fun.
I decided to have a good time with
That's great.
stock photos.
Okay, so.
It's coming from
Oh!
I didn't ask for your help, Adobe. Alright, so.
We're here to help.
Basically, most of your sound design you're always going to want to do in Pro Tools. In the rare case that you don't, or you want to do like a rough cut, just to see what it would sound like after you do your sound mix, it's really easy in Premiere to quickly duck and gain your audio as well as pan channels. So if you take your pen tool here and you say, look, this is too quiet. Rebeka, you made these loud waveforms way too quiet.
It's really loud.
You add these little, I don't think they're called keyframes. They are called. They are okay, they are
Yes.
keyframes. All right.
I'm sure they're all.
Yeah, I'm just an idiot.
In this case, they're just dying.
So
Breathe.
if I say at this point, well, I'm gonna.
This is a great way if you're ever teaching intro to field to lose everything.
Okay, so I put this one here. You can move it around and do what you want. See how I've put one down and one keyframe moves the whole gain of it? Because all that keyframe is doing is saying at this time be this value. And it's not changing it at all. So it's just going to be whatever I put it at, if that makes any sense. Please feel free to yell at me if I'm too confusing. Okay,
We will.
so if I say at this point I need it to get really loud because this is the point where the music is louder and the dialogue drops, right? So you're going to add another keyframe here, and then you can fade it up so it'll start soft. Okay, well, you're not going to hear it because it's too quick, but
Oh boy.
Yeah,
see how I faded up? Now you can use a plug-in effect, or you can just use an effect to do that. But this is easier because you can control it directly, and you can do it in the middle of your clip as opposed to only the beginning or the end. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yay.
Thanks, Nick.
Is there a pan? Can I actually do pan with the pen tool? I don't even.
In Pro Tools, there's a similar function.
You have to,
Oh, I won't interrupt. You're trying to-
you have to hit the FX button. With the, not that.
Oh, no.
Not that tool.
Now we're in a nested sequence.
Select.
No.
Select module.
No way.
Press V. V on your V.
Yeah?
If you
Victor.
right-click on the FX.
Oh.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha. So if I said,
The
Panner.
okay. It's been a while.
Go.
It's been a while.
Now you're.
Now I go back to pen
Oh, they
tool.
changed the- in CS6 they used to just have.
So then you could say at this point, I want it to be, I think the top is right. I want it to be right channel, and then at this point, I want it to fade down to the left channel.
And then fade it back to the right.
Oh, and then fade it back. I heard that, and then fade it back to the right.
No.
I think that's the right direction, but then you go.
I think that one's like low or off,
it
but,
off?
but it went
Did you ever
that
turn it back
way.
on?
I don't know if I turned it back.
No wonder it was gonna be on a one channel.
Okay, again.
So,
No, it's left.
okay, left.
It was pranked. I don't know. It's on.
It kind of, it
because
worked.
You know what it is? It's your wave.
Oh yeah, it's like Beatles
That's-
type stereo, where it's like.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a good example of stereo.
So it's much lower on the.
If I do that.
It's like
That
the
should.
voices
This should
are on
work.
one side.
Ready?
the music on
That's
Wow!
Sound design.
Good job, Nick.
Thanks. I can do something right.
There's
Not much though.
You need to cut back on the stuff that you're doing.
in the audio editing suite Pro Tools, which is another Avid-based editing suite for specifically audio. This function is expanded upon. It's called, and you can automate it just like you can do in After Effects and all other editing software. But and any like audio editing suite really, you're gonna have some kind of digital workstation that has faders, or which are those lanes of like buttons that slide up and down, like that have like lights on the top that show the level of the audio that's going through them. But what you can do is you can automate your lanes to automate panning. You can automate volume. You can automate specific parameters of any plugin. It's very, very open-ended as far as what you can do. But so for instance, for panning or volume, panning is actually a good example of this. So if you have a character's footsteps, you're usually recording that when you record the Foley for the footsteps, you're recording it with just one microphone, unless you're doing a specific technique where you're using stereo. But typically you record with one microphone. And but if the character's walking left to right, you're going to need to pan it. But it's not always going to be as smooth like where you can just put one marker here, and just have it be a linear line thing. So you're going to have to automate it. And what you can do is you can open up a recording. You can record onto the lane of whatever parameter you're automating, in this case panning. And you can use the fader to move it up and down, which would correspond to left or right. And you can get it to be very accurate to whatever object you're trying to track. Or, for instance, if there's a line of dialogue for a character that's coming in from off screen, you can bring it in slowly and gradually, and it'll record that and it'll do it every time. And you can get pretty in depth with it. But for instance, like if you have a, I'm trying to think of like plugin, I don't know. But if you have an EQ and you want to cut out some frequencies, but if it's but you don't want to use, but you can automate the entire plugin, but there's specific functions on inside every plugin, so it's like arbitrarily like 15 or something. Just as an example, but you only want to automate one parameter of that plugin. You can create an automation lane in Pro Tools that will allow you to record changes of just that parameter and nothing else in the plugin. So you can have like complete and total control over your plugins across time, which is very useful.
So you were talking about a thing in there called EQ.
Oh,
Let's
EQ.
expand on that. So EQ is a very important tool to use when doing sound design.
It's one of the fundamental, other than volume and panning, it's probably the most fundamental way to sculpt any audio that you have.
Yeah.
It's been in audio since since we had mixers or any like manipulation.
Yeah.
It's very classic.
So who knows what EQ does? Who knows what that
Who
means?
knows what it stands for, actually? Anybody?
That one I actually don't know.
Yeah.
Equalization.
It's pretty. Yeah.
Which to me doesn't make that much sense because if you're using an equalizer, you're not equalizing things, or else you're just not doing anything to the sound. It should be called the unequalizer, in my opinion.
UEQ.
Yeah, UEQ.
UEQ.
Ukulele.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Do you have can you bring up an example of an EQ? The EQ on here is
It's
really
pretty bad.
is not at all. good
Yeah.
for
Let's see if we
understanding.
can just like
Just look up
Pro Tools
6-band EQ.
EQ. Let's just see what that looks. If we can find a Google image search.
Oh, that's the 7 bands.
Oh,
That's
love
fine,
her.
That's fine. Just click on one of those images.
So,
Go up.
okay. This one's better.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's YouTube.
Just
Oh, no.
hold it. Just stay there.
Yeah.
Just stay there.
Control, scroll.
I'm trying. It's not working.
Oh, it's not working.
So we can.
Wow.
Cool. That's perfect. So there's a lot of different knobs on here. Don't look at that right now. Pay attention to
To the graph.
the graph right here. If you see that there's a number here from 20 to 2,000, do you know what that is? Does anyone want to take a guess?
Wow, Nick,
Nick.
that was confident.
No, Nick, you know. Does anyone want to take a guess?
Why is it 20 or 20,000?
That's a good question. I can get into that once we figure out what those numbers represent.
Do they have text next to them?
No.
No, it's just 20 to.
You just gotta know.
Does anyone? It's frequencies. So, do you know why? Does anyone know why this stops at 20K?
Because we can't hear.
You can't hear frequencies above 20K. Exactly.
Wow.
And it goes down to 20 because that's just
That's the beginning
you
of
really can't hear
human
below 20.
hearing.
So this is whenever you hear a sound, unless it's a pure sine wave, which is like literally one frequency. Any sound you hear in the world, our voices, a car, a musical instrument, it's all composed up of bands, different bands of frequencies. So when a trumpet or something or a piano plays a one note, that note is like the fundamental of the note is a frequency. But you're not just hearing that one frequency, or else you would just be hearing a sine wave. You're hearing a stacked layer of different frequencies called harmonics, which are mathematically precise and easy for your brain to process. That's why they sound nice. But it's not just music. It's every sound, like I said. So the human voice is you typically around the 500 to 5K range. It's about right here in the specifically in the 1K to 2K range. This is where the human voice generally is, but I mean there's frequencies down below and frequencies above, but they're generally aggregated right here. So what an EQ allows you to do is to target. This is a 7-band EQ, which means you have 7 adjustable frequency.
Like preset.
I don't know what to call them specifically, but you can cut and boost 7 different bands of the whatever sound you're modulating. So for instance, each one of these colored dots represents one of the bands. So which are adjustable. So this is so if you adjust this one, it would this is the gain. So you could boost it. So you can make what this band of frequencies louder, and you can adjust the width of the frequencies to using this. So if you see here, it's kind of like arced right here. There's a great picture for this, but we don't have time to really search for them. But when you bring it up higher than baseline, all these frequencies that are colored yellow here are going to be boosted according to the width of the band that you're adjusting. And if you make it really sharp, that means that they're only boosting that many frequencies. But if you make it really wide and you bring it up high, you're boosting that many frequencies. But you don't. You can also cut. So you can bring that down below and you cut those frequencies in the sound and it will become thinner and all that. Do you guys know what this is right here? That is called either. Oh no, I'm not going to talk about that. This is referred to as either a high pass or a low cut. It depends on if you're from the UK or this side of the pond, whether or not you use high cut or high pass or low cut. Sorry. Confusing. Basically, what this does, you can adjust the curve of it too, but it cuts all the frequencies down below here. So this would be this right here as it's set up is on its way to be being used to simulate like a cell phone sound. because you're cutting out the low frequencies, and your cell phone speaker really is only able to produce frequencies generally above like 1K and up. They're usually clustered here, but you can also do this the same as you can have it on the left side of the graph, which cuts the low frequencies. You can also have it on the right side of the graph, which cuts the high frequencies and lets everything blow through. But that's like the basic jump around there. EQing is it's a tool that is going to be with you if you're doing audio throughout the entire process, and it's it's basically your chisel to and like a sculptor, basically. It's that important. There's different shortcuts to use for like in Pro Tools for these things, where it allows you to select one of these bands or one of these colors, and you only hear the frequencies that it is selected on, so you can swipe it through and like scan through the audio and see and for anything that you need to boost or take out. That's more advanced stuff. In EQing I didn't get it at all at first, like as to when to do it or what to do or what not to do. My advice would be to practice, obviously, but a word of advice that I was given was to cut narrow, boost wide. So if you, for instance, if there's a hum in some dialogue, you would select one of these bands. You would make it very narrow because the hum is typically it's not going to be a wide thing. It's going to be something that's pretty narrow across just a few bands of frequencies. And you would boost it up so you could hear more clearly. Only solo that band and just scan it until you found it. And then once you find it, you cut it and you bring it down. But when you're cutting audio, or when you're like EQing out frequencies, you want to EQ as little out as possible, because the more you cut out, the more thin and the less like rich and full the sound is going to be, unless you're going for a thin sound. But for instance, audio is a big thing. EQing is like the bread and butter of a dialogue editor, because on-set sound can sometimes, I mean, as we've all know, as anybody who's worked on a set and worked with on-set audio, it can be messy. There's wind noise, so you got to EQ out the wind, which would be a low cut filter to get out the wind sound on the microphone. But because it's the human voice, it's our most direct contact to whatever's happening in the film world, if it's a narrative film or if it's news or anything. And if that's like their first line of defense when it comes to the quality of the production, other than the quality of the image, obviously. So your goal of dialogue editing and dialogue EQing is to maintain the presence and the quality of the naturalness of the person's voice. So if you cut out a large band of frequencies, you're cutting out a lot of the person's voice, and it's going to become not clear, or it's just going to sound bad. So if you need to remove something, make sure you remove narrow. But at the same time, if you're trying to boost something, so if you really want to bring out like the lower mid-range of someone's voice, if they're a woman, or if they're just a man who just have a very deep voice, or whatever, it doesn't have to be a gender thing. But if you boost it narrow, if you boost a narrow band of frequencies, that will stick out and it will sound unnatural. So what you want to do is you want to make it wide, so when you boost it, you're bringing up everything around it as well, so it blends in well and makes it more natural. Because our voices are typically even across a certain spectrum. Everyone's voice is different, obviously, but you're not talking with a 2K boost somewhere. If you do, you probably have something wrong. But yeah, cut narrow, boost wide. That's the best advice I could give you as far as EQ. As for voices anyway, and instruments, but if you're for effects, it's different, because sometimes it depends on the situation. So, but for dialogue, that's a surefire code to follow.
Yeah. So, yeah, just the essentials that you need to know for the sake of what I'm about to show you is that EQ just basically takes anything at a certain frequency, whatever you pick, and either boosts it or cuts it or lowers it, doesn't cut it completely. So let's use the example of a phone call. So this lovely lady's on the phone. Yeah, so
No shoes.
yeah, no shoes. She's just hanging out, having a good time, talking on the phone. But she's leaving a voicemail, and this is what the voicemail you want. So this is, yeah. So you want the voicemail to sound like a voicemail, but does this sound like a voicemail? If it plays.
See my voicemails are playing.
Hey, it's Casey. Blah 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 blah.
I don't think that sounds like a voicemail. Do you guys think that sounds like a voicemail? I don't. So,
Other than her name.
so, so here's what you would do in that situation when you want to make it sound like a voicemail or someone's on the phone or whatever. So let's go into audio effects. Wow, look at all this fun stuff. So who can so who can give me some like not reading review, just like who can tell me from Dante's thing what a high pass filter is? Or a low cut filter, same thing. Anyone? Jeremy.
Well, a high pass filter is going to let anything that's a high frequency through the filter, and anything that's a low frequency is going to get cut out.
Yeah. So yeah, it lets the high frequencies pass. Wow, it's in the name. Lets the low filters. Okay. So we're gonna take this high pass filter and drag it right on in, and we're already gonna hear that it's gonna sound different. Wow, that's really low.
Hey, it's Casey. Blah 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 blah.
I think it's your
I thought it was Stacy.
Yeah, you're probably right. Tee-hee. Just a fun little tip in Premiere. If you want to raise audio, you just take this little bar and move it up and down. Cool.
Hey, it's Casey. Blah 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 blah.
So as you can see, it already sounds more brittle and like trebly, just because phone speakers can't replicate bass frequencies very well. But I feel like this could use a little more. So let's take an EQ. Let's just take 20 bands, I don't know. And I don't really like how this looks in Premiere.
30.
Huh?
Should use the 30 band EQ, I think.
Yeah, I mean.
No. We're gonna master this for a movie.
So, this isn't the prettiest thing to look at, but the same concept still applies. So these are the low frequencies, the low bands, and then these are the higher ones, and then it's just going up. So these are the frequencies that would have been on the bottom and the other. So the human voice sits at like a mid-range. So like 500-ish to 1,000, 2K, I don't know, like around there. So let's boost that and make it, I don't know. And look at that, we're boosting wide, kind of, I don't know.
It's pretty wide.
Yeah, it's pretty wide. It's just a light boost in an arc thing. This is not fun to do in Premiere, but we get the job done. So now it sounds a little more mid-rangey and just like more phone-like, in my opinion. You can be the judge of it.
Hey, it's Casey. Blah 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 blah.
So yeah, a lot of EQ and yep. Was that
I
a
think the parametric equalizer has the
okay?
graph thing.
Does it?
Thing?
I don't know anything
One
about.
of them does. Yeah.
Wow. So.
Real life.
Yeah, so as I was saying, or as Dante was saying, or Nick was saying also, Pro Tools is very good, and you should be doing most of your audio stuff in Pro Tools. But we're using this to show the basic concepts. But yeah, so
Hey, it's Casey. Blah 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 blah.
yeah, so I said the same thing in here by just doing that. It got the job done. So it went from sounding like this
Hey, it's Casey. Blah 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 blah.
to
Hey, it's
this.
Casey. Blah 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 blah.
Sounds like a phone, right, guys? Yeah. So let's talk about speakers. Let's say you have.
Turn the monitor on.
You are so smart, Jack. Okay. So let's say. Sorry.
That's
Um,
fine. No, I saved you from that.
Cool. Cool, Jack. So let's say you're editing a film that has, I don't know, a song playing through bad speakers, like laptop speakers or something.
Is it a diegetic song?
Huh?
Is the song?
Yeah,
diegetic?
the
This
song
diegetic.
is diegetic. Wow. So you're gonna do basically the same thing as you did for the phone. Just get some EQ on it. Let's do this. And let's bypass that. I don't know why that's there. Smart. Okay. So let's just get rid of some of that that bass. Bye.
Get it all.
All of it. We could also use a high pass filter, but I'm feeling frisky.
It's also built into that plugin.
Yeah, I know. Thanks. So, yeah. Let's also add a high pass, because that's already here anyway. We can just change what frequency we use to do that. And you can make it sound worse or not as bad. But yeah, the same thing applies, is that, like, bad speakers can't replicate bass frequencies as well. Basically the same thing as the last thing, just wanted to throw it in there. All right, now let's say there's a concert next door and you didn't get tickets to the concert and you really like this band, but oh man, couldn't get tickets, but like you're right next door. So you're trying to listen.
They're playing in the office next.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Okay, no, we don't want that. Bypass. I was like, where is she? Okay, so let's say this is the song that the band next door is playing. Okay, it won't sound like that because let's talk about wavelengths. So wavelengths for different frequencies are either shorter or longer. So lower frequencies have longer wavelengths. So that means that they will get through things like walls, and they have more energy. They'll get through things. And then higher frequencies, like treble frequencies, are the opposite. They're shorter, and they don't really do well going through things. So if you're trying to replicate a sound going through a wall, or like from next door, like from like, I don't know, next door, yeah. You're gonna want to get rid of your treble frequencies because diegetic sound. Wow, more diegetic sound. So we're gonna achieve this by adding a low pass, which is already on this track so conveniently. And you can also change the frequency that you cut the frequencies above. So let's do like a nice 1999.5. So now instead of sounding like it's, like it's right in front of you, it'll sound like it's in the next door room. Wow, sounds like it's coming from another place that's not near you. What? Damn. Yeah. And then let's say there's a church. Let's say there's a church that you're filming in, and oh no, you lost all your audio from that day of filming. Yikes. You know how it goes. But you still have some cool shots, and you're like, oh, well, we could at least use these shots and like put like some music in it. But oh no, the music doesn't sound like it's in a church. It sounds normal. Wow. Sounds like regular music that's not in a church. It sounds like well-recorded music in a studio. But let's talk about reverb. So reverb. Who knows what reverb is? Jeremy.
It's the bounce of sound across rooms and off of other objects, and as it like bounces around, it multiplies on itself, and it kind of gets more and more complex.
It's just a bunch of different echoes. It's
Yeah.
many echoes.
It's similar to an echo. But why is it not an echo? Anyone? Any of my intro to audio people? Remember that? Jack?
Echoes are a very specific type of reverb,
Yeah,
essentially.
that's basically it.
Echoes,
So
yeah.
echoes are distinct repetitions, and then reverb is just random and it's everywhere. Yeah. Yeah. So an example of reverb is like a stairwell in this building. When you walk into a stairwell and you like talk, it's like, whoa, there's a lot of echoey, reverby type sounds. And that also applies in a church that you filmed at and lost all the audio for. So this is what the reverb thing looks like in Premiere. It's surround reverb, at least, which is fun. But yeah, these are all just like different parameters that you can change, and there's also like little presets. So, wow, a cathedral! That's already a preset! Wow! So,
We're done.
I know, it's so convenient. And then here's something that you want to like think about is the wet level. That's one of the more important things when it comes to reverb. Basically, it's how much it is reverbing. So like, this is like, so like, if it's at 0%, it's like nothing. There's nothing happening. And then at like 50%, it's like, oh, it's like half happening. And then 100, it's all happening.
The wet level is how.
It's how much of this you are applying to the effect, to the sound, basically. It's hard to explain. It's basically just how much percentage of what you're doing.
Basically, you have your original audio, which is dry because it doesn't have this effect applied to it, and you also have the audio that is created from the effect of the reverb. The wet level is, and when you have the wet level set at any number above 0, they are both playing at the same time. The wet level is the percentage of which audio is playing. So if it's dry, the more dry it is, the less reverb there is, and the more the original dry audio there is. But if it's 100% wet, that means you're only hearing the reverb. You're not hearing the original audio at all. So you want, unless you're going for like, what's it called? Like dream pop or something. Shoegaze. If you're going for shoegaze, you want it up, but you want it somewhere in the middle where you hear the sound in its original form, but also the echo or the reverb.
So let's do like 40% and see how that sounds, just for funsies.
Mildly damp.
Yeah, mildly damp, like drizzling. So, wow.
It's moist audio.
That's quite wet. And if you don't like how that sounds, you can lower this or like change the room size, or these are all things that you can play with and mess around with, and it takes a while to understand how all of these things affect the audio differently. But yeah, yes?
So on that point, almost all of these, like the equalizer bands and everything, have right by the power button up there in the corner, there's the presets. And these are really good for kind of figuring out how they work, because you can.
What are all these?
Sometimes they have
No,
you can check them out and see what the different.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
It's nice reverb.
Do in the
Lost in
church.
Space. Do Lost in Space.
So you can kind of see how the values get manipulated in what.
Lost in Space.
House.
Oh boy.
Hank the Tank.
That's heavy. It's
Damn.
80% wet.
Yeah. 100 what? Okay.
So yeah, that's handy for figuring out.
Yeah, so
how they work.
reverb is a thing that you always want to consider. Shannon?
Can you go over how you should be monitoring your audio when you're trying to play with effects?
Only those white Apple earpods.
Yeah, only AirPods. They have to be like Bluetooth connected and everything.
So not those.
Yeah.
Don't use that.
So
When you mean modern, do you mean like
Like
levels, or do you mean like physically like speakers
Like, how do I
versus
know if
headphones?
Good off my laptop.
Oh, you don't. You don't.
You don't
Well,
fix on your
actually,
lap.
that's a fair
You just
point,
hold your
because
ear close.
this is not really film advice. This is, well, I guess it is film advice too, because everyone watches a movie on a laptop. So if you're mixing an audio sound design for a film or whatever video it is, in this modern age, everybody in the grandma watches their stuff off their iPad, iPhone, or laptop, and doesn't necessarily go to the theater or watch it on their home stereo system. So when you're doing everything, you want to do it in the highest quality studio that you can, good monitors, good headphones, all that jazz. But at the end of the day, a consumer is probably not going to consume it with your $15,000 speakers or $15,000 headphones. They're probably going to be listening to it on their laptop or probably their iPad, probably children. So you want to every now and again export it and listen to it through an iPad or an iPod or some other consumer device to make sure that you're hearing the dialogue and everything's coming across. Because if it doesn't come across there, you're not doing what you need to be doing. Because that is, in this day and age, like that's what you have to be mixing for. Not entirely, but you need to take that into account. And that's more so in music specifically, where it's that hard line. But I mean, I watch movies on my laptop.
How do you do it for both that and a screen?
So that's basically trial and error and bringing it out and just listening to it on your speakers and also listening to it on an iPhone and stuff, and then bring it back in. If something gets lost, take into account that most consumer grade speakers do not have sufficient low end. So if it's and it's usually tinny, it's kind of, you have to play it by ear and just tweak it as you see fit. But if it's a more delicate sound, that's like a very high, full of high frequencies, or you're probably gonna have to boost some of the mid frequencies or something like that. I mean, there's no fix all for every situation, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a few more things on sound design type things, but that was more of just if I ran out of time and didn't have anything to fill it. So just gonna go back to the beginning where someone, I think it was Nick, mentioned there's a way to fix when your thing's only in one channel. So I actually have a perfect example of that right here. So here's a story time. When I was in high school, I filmed a documentary for my final senior project thing, and I didn't realize until about a year ago that all of the audio is only in one channel. Just all of it. It's only like the left channel for some reason. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's fun. Yeah, so if I knew that was the case back then, because I didn't know what I was doing back then, I didn't even use headphones or anything. I had no way of realizing that it was only in one channel. Don't do that. But if you catch that and you're like, oh, how do I fix that? You can just fill left with right or fill right with left. I actually forgot which one this is. Okay, so it's only in the left channel. So let's fill right with left and make it mono and at least, and just not make it terrible.
It was really bad.
Wow. She's talking about my documentary. That's a joke, huh? Yes? There is. No. You can do it. If you want to. Okay. Yeah? What?
Right click it. Audio channels.
Oh yeah, this is a way to do it.
Because it makes the waveforms pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually felt repulsed when you grabbed an effect.
Wow, now the waveforms look pretty. So there's two ways to do that. I really don't do audio in Premiere ever.
No one should.
So, yeah.
Leave me alone.
What happens when you output that duplicated
video.
stereo file to one speaker, one mono speaker? They're the same audio. It's the same sound waves layered on top of each other, and this is a new word. It's called polarity. But basically, all sound waves are just sine waves, which are like the S waves. Polarity is the direction of the bumps in the S. So if you can do a thing that you reverse the polarity, so you take a sine wave that looks like this and you make it look like this, and if you do, it's what it is. So because they're the same audio that's duplicated in the left and right channel. They're both going like this, but if you're listening to that through a mono speaker, so they're all two channels which are normally sent to two different speakers are being sent to one speaker. What is going to happen to the sound, like the volume? It's going to double because the sound waves are both going the same direction, so they're going to go here and they're going to boost each other. But if you duplicated them and switched the polarity of one of the channels, so basically you're taking the same waveform, you're duplicating it, and you're making one this way. You're making one go this way. when you sum them to mono, as they say, it's like doing math. When you take two arcs together and you put them together, it goes to zero because they're the same audio, but because they're opposite polarity, they're being pulled in two different directions, so they're just going to collapse into zero. So that is something to take into consideration, especially when trying to mix to something. Because with your iPhone speakers, I think nowadays they're stereo, but like stereo doesn't really exist on phones because they're so close together. But so if you have two audio clips which for some reason are polarity reversed, there's reasons for it. But when you sum it to mono on a phone speaker, it goes away. It deletes itself essentially. So that's also something.
If you ever want to hear how bad compression is messing up your audio, export it with your compression and then reverse it and then put it with your original, and then whatever artifacts you hear is pretty much how bad the compression is.
Cool. Yeah, there's that. Does anyone have any specific experiences that they've had this semester right now in the past that they've had that they need to fix with their audio or anything? Yep.
I have a student this weekend. The people are standing at a door, cameras behind both the people, can't hear anything because they couldn't get the boom over there. Suggestions?
ADR.
What I would suggest in that case would be if ADR is not an option, you would EQ I don't know. Can we bring up the picture again? If EQ isn't the option, as I said before, the human voice is typically situated mostly between 1K and 2K in this general area. You would probably want to boost that just to capture as much of the voices as possible. But if ADR is an option, are they facing the camera?
Yep.
Okay.
And mumble.
Well, there's unfortunately not. I mean, not there much that I know of that they could do other than just like trying to do the thing where I said where you take one bend, you make it kind of narrow, and you solo it and you scan it along until you find the band where their voice is most present, and then boost that a little bit.
What are you doing?
What am I doing? Something? Working on a project with somebody actually. I was gonna take them. It's the only time. Okay, I'll talk to you. I was disappointed to find out that she could only work that one day. Anyway, off topic. Sorry. Yeah. Anyone else have any specific issues with audio? Including things? Does anyone want to know how to get rid of wind?
Yes.
I'm gonna need that.
So there are many different things you can use. You can be smart about it and use a plugin that's designed to get rid of wind. We have some of those, but another way to also do it, but which would also aid in the plugin, would be to use a low cut or high pass filter, which is basically what this is. So basically, you're not going to get rid of all the wind noise because, like I said, every sound except for sine waves are a bundle of different frequencies. But a majority of the time, that sound that sounds like wind, that sound is typically from below 100 hertz. So you'd use a high pass filter and just bring it up, so you get rid of the low end. So at least it's not like damagingly like present. You're still going to hear it up here, but that's where the voice is. And you can't really keep that out because the voice will go with it.
I think adaptive noise reduction is the one that people have the most problem with because it sounds like it's the best tool ever, and then it doesn't affect the audio at the beginning.
Yeah, I tried to figure out how to make that sound not terrible in preparation for this demo, and I could not do it.
There are reasons why plugins cost money, and
Yeah.
we have really good plugins here for noise reduction. So, for instance, if whoever's recording sound on set there was a problem with the mic and they needed to boost the gain to get a reasonable level, but you have shh in the background, there's plugins that reduce the noise and keep whatever signal is there. They're very complicated algorithms, but basically they actually operate on the same exact principle of flipping the polarity, like I said. I don't know specifically how they all do it. They all do it differently, but basically they figure out, using intelligent algorithms, what frequencies are unnecessary and are the noise, and they take those and they duplicate them and flip the polarity, so when you sum them together, it gets rid of it and cancels itself out. But there's a reason why they cost money. I can do this really quick. Say you're editing, you've just picture locked, you have a couple effects where you think you want them to be in your Premiere session, and you or your sound editor or mixer are ready to move on to that step of the film process. How do you get your session from Premiere to Pro Tools? I can show you. So typically you want what is called the Academy leader, which is the 5, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown and like a beat. I don't have that with me, and we don't have time to really put that in there. But you want it to be 8 seconds long, and it starts a countdown from 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and then on the 2, you want a beep to happen. And there's some within that you can find online, but you can also use a signal generator and just make it really short on the 2, so it just beeps on 2. The reason why we do that is to maintain absolute time across all the different editors, because like sound effect or visual effects, there's not just one editor editing the sound. There's Foley editors, there's sound effect editors, dialogue editors, a whole team. So, and the same file is being passed around between different people. And you want to make sure that when you merge different sessions together, they're all aligned to the picture. And this is how you would do it. And I don't have a leader for you, but there would be 8 seconds. I would just pop it in the beginning here, and the first frame of action, which is the first frame of the film or whatever video project you're working on, would be start at exactly 8 seconds into the time code here. So bypassing that very, very, very important step to export your Premiere session as is with all your files, sound included, into Pro Tools. What you would do here is you make sure you have the timeline selected, or whatever timeline you're trying to export. You go up to File, you go down to Export, and there's 2 file formats that you can use. There's one that I don't recommend using, but you can use if you need it, which is OMF, which stands for Open Media Format. And basically what it does is it is a file that itself does not contain any audio or any files. It is just simply a collection of fingers that point whatever program that is that you put it in, that you open it with, to the specific locations of whatever files that you have. So it just links everything, or it'll allow whatever program you put it into to link itself with whatever files that you feed it. That is sometimes complicated and gets tricky because you lose files, and you would have to keep moving the same folder of files between people, and that can get messy. And OMFs have a 2 gig limit as far as the amount of data that can go into it, which is, especially with working with larger videos, not useful. So what you want is AAF, which is Avid's own open media format, and which allows you to store the files inside of the file itself, and carry it with you much easier. So you want to click Mix Down Video. Basically what that does is it'll export the video as well, but it'll just put the audio inside the video as well, so you have a guide track on top of all the specific tracks that you have. And what you want to do is you want to hit Breakout to Mono and Enable. What this will do is, it's kind of annoying that it does this, but it's just how it works. I don't know how to get around it. Basically, see this track here, how it has two channels. It's a stereo file. It'll break that stereo file into two separate two separate files when you import it into Pro Tools. So instead of being on one track of audio, they'll be on, like, this left channel will be on audio 1, and this one will be audio 1B or something. So yeah, you just need to make sure that that's enabled so you can actually export it. Render audio clip effects, I wouldn't recommend that, because if you're exporting your audio to Pro Tools, you're going to be using your effects in Pro Tools, and you don't really want the Premiere ones, because as you can see, they are free. They suck. So don't render them unless you know for sure that you want to use it, but I still wouldn't recommend it. Then you come down here, and you want to make sure that the sample rate matches whatever sample rate you've been editing in, and typically that's pretty the same, so and you usually edit in 48K. So that's good right now. Bits per sample, you want that to be 24. That is industry standard. And then this is also, this next one is the probably the most important here. This is how it's going to manage the audio files or in your session, whether or not you want them embedded in the AAF file, which is what I recommend, or if you want them in a separate folder to go along with it. Personally, I always embed, but if you want to put it in a separate folder, go for it, whatever works for you. And lastly, you want it to be broadcast wave, just like a WAV file. It's a high quality to maintain all the information in the audio. And also here, this might bite you in the butt if you don't pay attention to this and if it's set to trim audio files. So basically, just like film, when you're recording a take, you don't actually use the whole take. You're not going to put, okay, ready, slate one. You want to cut that out, obviously, but it's part of the same video, but you don't see that in the final cut, obviously. But for audio, if you need you don't, the dialogue that is matched to the picture is you don't want to cut, start over. You want to copy the complete audio file so that when you expand the audio in Pro Tools, you'll have the handles. And if you have trim audio files selected, it will cut off the audio files at the handles, so you won't have any handles. And you won't be able to extend and find snippets to place in, and it will restrict your editing, and you never want that. So you always want to copy complete audio files. What are handles? Handles are everything that are not currently on the timeline and exist virtually in the files. They're the complete audio file or video file. And for instance, if I can't move it now, but if we extended this video and you wanted it, this cut, you want it to be longer, all the frames that weren't there before but were there after you extended it are the handles. It's not a very pretty definition. There's a better one, but that's basically what they are. So you got all your settings ready to go. You would just want to hit OK. It's going to ask you where you want it. Where do we want it? We want it at the desktop. Oh, let's try desktop. We're going to create a new folder. We're going to say, hello, AAF.
And then you would just save it, and then that's a thing. Then you can open it in Pro Tools.
Yep.
Yeah!
Well, it's going to take a while to do that, so I won't actually do that. But basically, you'll end up with a file, and you can just open that in Pro Tools, and you'll go through a whole menu there. But that's basically it. And it'll just recreate your session with audio in Pro Tools. So
And then you can do cool things with it that you can't do in Premiere. Cool. Yeah, thanks for watching me flounder around Premiere Audio for an hour.
Sorry for going over.
That's good. Thank you.
How do we stop
Yay.
recording?
Top
Oh, yeah.
Top menu bar.
The stop button.